Okay, hi, I'm Sahil. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to be, at best, giving you a teaser of what I'm working on with my organization by the end. I decided to have some fun with it, and at the end, I'll link you a video that you can see more. So let's begin with a journey through mental illnesses of AI. So here's something that happened to me a few months ago, a few weeks ago, and you're going to tell me what's going on here. So here was the prompt that I wanted. I wanted an image. It's to generate an image of a person with their head inside a psychedelic pool, but the rest of the body is outside the pool.
That's gonna be ugly.
So I'm prompting you now. Maybe you can picture something using your AI in your mind. And this is what happened when I asked you to generate. And as you can see, the body is inside the pool and the head is outside the pool. And for some reason, the person is psychedelic rather than the pool being psychedelic, which is not so bad. But the head inside and body outside was not what I wanted. So obviously, being very nice, I hope you can read it, I asked very politely, is the person outside the pool? I'm not giving it any information, any special intelligence, I'm just asking it itself. And ChatGPT responds, no, the person is not clearly outside the pool. Let me generate a new image with this correction. And then it generates another image with a person still with the body inside the pool and the head outside the pool, confidently declaring, here's the updated image with the person clearly outside the pool and only their head is in the pool. Now, obviously, I'm a little bit frustrated at this point, so I say, every time you generate an image, I want you to ask yourself. This is something that, again, I'm not doing anything special. I'm not giving it anything special, so it should be automatable. So I just say, every time you generate an image, why don't you ask yourself, is the person outside the pool? Clearly, you can see that they're not outside the pool, and answer it, and try again if not. And so it says, okay, I will do this. And so it generates another image of a person's body inside the pool and head still outside the pool. And then it keeps going on, it keeps repeating itself and generates similar images, promising more and more until it has a breakdown and says, the latest image still does not show the person clearly outside the pool, I apologize, and it gets timed out. So, yeah, the question is just what's going on here. It's not like it lacks intelligence. It's not like it can't see what's going on. In fact, when you ask it what's going on, it answers what's going on. Another quick example is where, this is from more than a few months ago. I just asked it to please stop responding if you have any questions, if you have any more questions. And then immediately after that, it says, if you have any more requests or questions, and then I ask it, didn't you just do exactly what I asked you not to do? And again, to check whether it understood, I asked, can you please list all your sentences and see if there's any sentence like, if you ask, have any more questions? And as you can see, it's highlighted in caps lock, the sentence that it should not have said. Clearly knows how to not say the sentence, it knows which thing I'm talking about, but somehow can't put things together. So I want to ask the audience, what's going on here? Any thoughts on why it's not able to do something so simple that clearly it knows how to do?
Your drums are not great.
including the text one, which was just don't say this sentence.
No, maybe it's like when you ask someone not to think about something, and then they think about it, and they can't not think it.
That's a good possibility. No, I don't have any answers for you, unfortunately. However, I do have some analogies. Who's heard of this word? One hand. Okay. So this is anosognosia. Noso means knowledge. Gnosia generally means awareness. And here's a report from someone with right hemisphere damage, a woman who, the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, so the left side got completely paralyzed. And some of you might know the right hemisphere is also responsible for general awareness as opposed to focused awareness. And so here's a conversation that takes place between the doctor and the patient. The doctor asks, can you use your left hand, which remember is paralyzed? And the patient says, yes. The doctor says, are both hands equally strong? The patient says, yes, they're equally strong. And then the doctor asks, Mrs. M, point to the student with your right hand. She's able to do that, she points. Mrs. M, point to the student with your left hand. She doesn't say anything, she doesn't do anything. And the question is, Mrs. M, why are you not pointing? And she says, because I didn't want to. And the weird thing is that this person is completely sane. They are otherwise able to function very normally. And there's a lot more dialogue. There's a book that I'm quoting from about neuroscience, where people just have various excuses for why they don't want to, they can't, or something, but they will not admit that they are paralyzed, which is very strange. You might have seen this before. So it's ChatGPT with code interpreter, newly included, and someone asks, can you compute the 7th root of 3 raised to the power of 7? And ChatGPT, newly integrated with the code interpreter, says the 7th root of 3 raised to the power 7 is approximately 4.26. What's wrong with this answer?
It's incorrect.
Why is it incorrect?
It's 3.
It's 3. And interestingly, 2 hours after this, someone put this image and gave it to ChatGPT and asked it, what's funny about this? And ChatGPT says precisely what's funny about this image is that the 7th root of 3 raised to the power 7 is simply 3, whereas the answer given is 4.26, which is incorrect. This was not with new upgrades. This was just ChatGPT trying to respond immediately to the image. Interestingly, again, this is from the same book, The Matter with Things, they found that a personnel officer with right deficits, again, right hemisphere responsible awareness, had no insight into his incapacity. But when asked what he would advise a colleague to do, he readily agreed that such a person should not work. So there was a way in which the question, I should have included more context. But the idea is that if you give third-person scenarios to someone with brain damage, they have a very similar response. They're able to give the correct answer. But you ask them about themselves, they will not admit to their incapacity, which is also a fun comparison. And have people heard of this mental disorder? Anyone else who knows this word? Burns, do you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, well, it's basically the mental disorder that you perfectly know what to do in your own best interest, but somehow you just can't do it.
Right, and so as you can see, Burns is calling it a mental disorder, but we're both saying it jokingly, this obviously happens to you all the time, you know you should exercise and you don't do it. And I couldn't dig up the image in time, but there was an example of AutoGPT, which you might have heard of, where ChatGPT is, made more agentic. And you ask it to set up a calendar API, it doesn't do anything and says, I've set up the appointment for you, do you want anything else? It's sort of stuck in its head, in its ideas, in its dreams, and is not able to act in reality. Another disorder, CIP, does anyone know what this might be? There's something called congenital insensitivity to pain, where people are born without the feeling of pain. So they'll know that it's wrong to be bleeding from your foot if they step on something, but they just won't feel pain. And importantly, they won't care to fix anything about that. They can intellectually get a sense of that, and if you remind them, they'll put on a bandage, but they won't have intrinsic motivation to actually take care of their body. Now, I'm not going to list out an example because it's an example for the future of AI. But I want you to see what this has in common, all of these examples, which is related to also the introductory orientation that Burns gave about integrity and integration, which is, notice these are all failures of integrity. So the first one is sort of like a mental integrity failure, where you have an uneven distribution of insight or awareness across your cognition. So this is my frustrations at ChatGPT. Then you have executional integrity, where the distribution of insight does not go into your actions. So this is acrasia or the AutoGPT failure. And you also have physical integrity, where you don't care about your body. And the claim is that this is about the failures of autonomy in the near future. But we're not going to go talk about that either. I want to talk about civilizational integrity. And this is a bit of a jump, but you'll see it follows a similar pattern. And so I'm going to put out a quote by William Gibson, Does anyone know which relevant quote from William Gibson, the sci-fi author? Okay.
Isn't it from Chris Richardson of microservices?
I'm guessing he forgot to cite Gibson. And also, Amara's law, which is we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate in the long run. So this is like the pace of integration happens slowly. You can't expect just because you know something in one place that everything else will suddenly magically also accord with that. Consistency is a finite process. Okay. So let's talk about this distribution across civilization. Traditionally, when you distribute something, say you figured out a new way to make tasty hamburgers, you create this, and then you figure out how to package it so that you can scale it. You know, if you're like McDonald's, you're like, if I can just package this, I can globalize and send it everywhere. So that's how you come up with an idea, you bundle it, modularize it, make it easy to ship, and then you send it out. The claim is that with AI-powered adaptivity, there's a switch where you ship first and create second. And in fact, you drop the packaging shit entirely. Why would you want to do that? Well, the claim is something like packaging is sort of like modularizing, making things independent of their surroundings, which is decontextualizing in some way from what it is in order to ship it, which is a kind of exclusion and insensitivity, which is actually what's behind centralization in my opinion. But I'm not going to talk about this. Probably I'll skip this entirely during this talk and we'll continue to something more applied rather than abstract. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about two ways that I am deeply disappointed with people's use of thoughts about AI. One is, as Beatrice also mentioned, that I don't know which of you were there for her tech tree thing, but she talked about if you want to imagine AI futures, please don't just use AGI as a magical panacea that will solve everything. That's one way to just stop thinking. And the other one, which I absolutely despise, is add an animated button and you're like, here's an AI integrated thing, here's my document, now you can chat to your data, etc. I do not think this is the finality of interfaces that we will have for AI. So if you disagree with both of these, then you might as well walk out now, because there's not going to be anything useful for you. All right. I will additionally say, just because you can spam your user with endless chat doesn't mean you should do that. And this is the final part, participative production. We talked about distribution and production, and the claim is that you can have production post-distribution. Creation happens after shipping. So let's look at production. So usually there's like producer and consumer. So a simple example is writing. So a thing a writer can do, a writer/publisher, is they can write a book, distribute it, and the reader can read it. It's a modular object that you can hold. And the reason I say 1700s is because I'm about to compare it to what's possible today, in the, let's say from the 2010s onwards, which is you can do this new thing, this new magical thing, that if you talk to someone from the 1700s, if you said to someone from the 1700s, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to publish the book first, and people can change the typeface later. They're going to just balk at you. What do you mean change the typeface later? The typeface is what's used to print the actual book. You can't change the font later. And we're like, no, it works out in the future. We just change the font from a drop down. Like, no, how can you do that? And like, well, it's just kind of like rewriting the whole book later on. That's what it's like. But it happens so quickly that it's sort of like, it's just immediate change. And you can just select the font later. But obviously this is very possible where you have an artifact, this ebook, that the consumer can also participate in. They can select from a parameterized list of fonts a particular font, and then that can be a nice font for the reader. This is not so magical to us. However, this is not the only thing, this is not the only way the technology is catching up. One counterintuitive thing that's happening now is anytime you are writing a book, a paper, a post, or whatever, a protocol, what you are often told as the first piece of advice to a writer is know your audience very well. If you're talking to your mom, you're going to have very different words compared to jargon you might be able to use with your peers. But this can be dropped now already, where instead of writing a book or a post or a paper, you write a book prompt. Maybe you write a book prompt on economics rather than writing a book on economics. And you as a reader may be very interested in Web3 stuff, and you're like, here's my background. And then the book prompt becomes a relevant book, perhaps using tokenomics as all of the examples and analogies for you specifically. And each one of us reads a slightly different book. This is meant to be a very simple example for the teaser and build up to what I'm actually working on, which is theories themselves are products. Theories as these artifacts of insights that are shared. So again, the producer and the consumer. Does anyone have a guess as to what goes on the left and what goes on the right? There's maybe not just one answer, but how can theories be seen as a product?
Media and people who go for conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Theories are the consumer of the inputs of reality that was observed before, if they are the product.
That's kind of close to what I'm going to present. So the idea is that theories are like general theoretical solutions, and the consumers of the theories are people who will apply those theories to specific problems. Does that make sense to everybody? Hands up if that's not clear.
Oh, so but then theories are not the product, but the applied solutions are the product, right?
The theory that itself is like an artifact that contains the insight usually, So I'll give you an example. So here's a very simple example where the problem is I have to factor x squared plus 5x plus 6 on the right. Now there's clever tricks to do this, but mathematicians have figured out a general solution. And this is actually similar to the changing font version, because what they do is they bundle together a parametrized solution called the quadratic formula, and if you plug in the values of the numbers you see, you'll get the answer to be x equal to -2 and -3. So the idea is that you have these parametrized theories that have these parameters, so they can be multiple different kinds of theories depending on the local context. However, the context has to be set via drop-down essentially, even though there's an infinity drop-down. Another example is maybe some of you know that for your GPS, even in your phone, you need to incorporate both general relativity and special relativity. Because satellites that help triangulate your position have to run very quickly at like 4 kilometers per second or something, and they're at the height of like 20,000 kilometers. So what happens is that because the changing speed and gravity, you have some sorts of time dilation that you have to adjust for, because GPS has to keep its clocks synchronous with other satellites in order to triangulate, otherwise there's an error. So there's another example of Einstein coming up with this theory of relativity, which tells you how your time changes across speeds and across distances. And the GPS designer can just plug in Einstein's equations. I wish I'd written them down. And then the artifact generates a relativistic correction. And I'm going to stop in actually just 5-ish minutes. The whole point of this whole thing is to talk about adaptive theories, which is the magic that I'm looking forward to, which is it could be you on the left with some insight, say about what is really the definition of decentralization, which people might fail to formally define. Or what is the definition of power? I mean, you're worried about power-seeking AI or someone deceptive. And instead of producing a formalism, you produce a theory prompt analogous to producing a textbook prompt that the local context gets to fill in and then becomes the relevant theory, that becomes the relevant mathematical formalism in interaction with the local environment. And that's actually the end of my talk, because if you want to know more about this, I will send you a video. I will say that this is about decentralizing the production of insight in a very different way than you're used to. I won't say much about this slide unless people poke me about it. I'll just leave space for questions. And if you want to learn more, you can just scan this and watch a video, which will tell you a lot more. Thank you.
I think this reminds me, I think it was XKCD or like another web comic where you see like the writer writing 10 bullet points saying, to the LLM, just write me a 200 pages book about this, the bullet points. And on the other end, you have like the consumer saying, oh, I have this 200 pages book, just write me 10 bullet points. And what they could have done is just,
Yeah.
exchange the bullet points.
Yeah. So I think if you go far enough, you can actually drop formalisms entirely and directly dialogue with each other in an insightful way. But I don't think you will drop them completely entirely, but they might become secondary. But there is some use of mathematics, which is different from pure communication, which is it also informs your machines, which are used to like machine language rather than human language. And so instead of like dropping the mediation of the bullshit that was produced in the middle, you will also have something that will plug into the machine. And so you might have reason to keep it. But you will obviously also have explainers that will take any formalism and explain to you in a local way what the hell it's talking about.
Where is the context piece coming from?
So the idea is that in the prompt, and maybe I should have included an example, but I underestimated how long, whichever one this will take. The idea is that you will participate as a consumer. So for example, if you're trying to define what power means, again, there's no equation for power. If you look for the mathematics of power, you will see various people attempting various formalisms that because they have this rigid abstraction of parametrization, they will not work everywhere. But for example, you might say, oh, if you want to understand power, look at who influences whom, what's going on with respect to resources, or who does someone stop for, and this could be all part of the theory prompt, which is very neatly and crafted with a lot of hard work, similar to how equations are crafted with a lot of hard work that crystallize the insight. And then there will be some local data. Perhaps this will be just like a video recording of the local thing, or it'll be a description of, oh, we're all in a room and there's a speaker, and the speaker seems to be able to tell people when to speak up or not, and then it'll produce a relevant mathematical formalism for the engineers who might also be locally wanting to work on it. Does that answer your question?
So how do you see, so let's go back to the example of writing a book. So I'm going to make an effort to describe maybe what you're trying to say. Are you saying in the future, if I want to write a book, I don't write it out, but somehow there's a shared intelligence that people can tap into my context, and people can read that book if they want to.
Yeah, so I don't know if it would be your context or your insight or what it would be exactly. It's unclear. Of course, there are many different kinds of books. But suppose you have some ideas around, what are some ideas you have that you'd like to share?
I'm writing a book on gardening.
On what, sorry?
On gardening.
Gardening, yeah. So if you have some ideas about like how to do the trimming or what kinds of species to look out for in your local garden, you might have some things you'd want to share. As you package that, probably you just write notes to yourself. Depending on how much adaptivity we have on the AI, you just have your notes on yourself. And then there will be a representative of the consumer, potential consumer, who will look into, oh, is this a beginner gardener, is it an advanced one, whatever it is. And then there will be an artifact that will be produced. Simple thing, of course, could be that you attach a chatbot to your notes with some privacy functionality. But that's the kind of design that I do not think is the be-all and end-all of design, which is the one that people try to do. It's like, if you want to write a book, well, we just upload the book to a chat, to Claude or whatever, and then just ask it questions. And that puts a lot of the design process on the user end, actually, because the user has to figure out. And of course, people put in suggestions of ask this, ask that, but it's not quite a good template, not quite like the mood and ease of just reading a book from front to back. And so the idea is that that sort of artifact will be created just in time for the consumer who might interact with your local nodes, or you might do some bit of hard work. The important thing is it's unclear what sort of collaborative relationship you will have with your AI. To some degree, the logistics will be served by the AI, but you will have to provide some level of, as you said, context or insight or tone, etc., which is like prompt is the only word we have for this whole economy of possible objects that will feed into an AI that will collaborate with you.
I think the idea, there are like, for instance, software for people that write novels, where like authors just, go to a page, define all the characters, a description, or like put like key plot points, just because normally like writers, forget these things, or like, then, there are like plot holes in the book. But if you just put that on a AI, and then you say like, this is like the plot, then it's up to the consumer where to buy the movie or the comic or
Yeah,
the
that could be
novel.
an example. Yeah, that's a great example. Actually.
It'd be great to get a book on gardening that's written by someone in a completely different biome than I am, and some of the plants match and some don't, and some interact well.
Yeah.
It just takes out the plants that I don't
Exactly.
get to grow where I am, and it just puts others that will do the same function. That just feels like a
Exactly. Yeah, that's also another great example. Remember, the book is actually just an analogy for the theory stuff, which is what I really care about, which is why it was called the future of understanding, because theories are, of course, one of the, both mathematical and otherwise, are the ways we make sense. This is about sense making and about adaptive sense making. That's the question.
So, yeah, on the theories, is the person who engineers the prompt, the thinker who theorizes the prompt, gonna have to have already understood the applications in order to write a good enough prompt that it will be able to generate?
So I've drawn like very linear arrows in order to simplify, but actually, obviously, no one comes up with their theories in a silo. They're not isolated. They have to interact with whatever they're actually working out. They will not get an insight just sitting on an armchair, usually if it's about being applied. They will interact with the real world. You try to build something, you're like, oh, this is what decentralization is really about. And then you build more and you realize, no, actually, it wasn't just about that. It was also about legitimacy or something else. And this feedback loop actually produces some core insights that are actually pretty clear. And then the hope is once you've interacted with your environment, you can actually distribute these insights in a way that will be received, in a way that is interoperable to others without being foundational. It is not meant to be centralized in the way that abstractions are centralized. Here's the theory that will become the relevant thing. It's more that you have some insight that will cohere with other people. Does that help answer your question? I think Zug had a question first.
I'm
Yes.
still confused with the idea of decentralization of insight.
Yeah.
Because I cannot really perceive how insight is something that is centralized at this point.
Yeah. So if you notice, it's like centralized production of insight. And the reason I say this, maybe I will say a little bit more about this. I'm calling these adaptive theories, but I actually call them live theories in the actual order. And the idea is that intuitions like physics are the one that we use to figure out very clear mathematical theories. And physics has these background assumptions. Basically, the same laws of physics apply no matter where you are in space and time. They're all locally defined, and they're also very modular. And you also look for the universal principles, the necessities, like what is necessarily true rather than a mere artifact of where you happen to be. Whereas biology actually completely reverses this. So this is bullet number 4 over here. Biology is all about heterogeneity rather than homogeneity, in the sense that you just all have different kinds of systems that are maintaining actively these laws that you have, such as regulating your temperature right now. And in some ways, they're not like just universal. They're not like, it's not the case that you have the same temperature over there versus the bird that entered earlier. They all have different kinds of rules. Also, they're not locally defined in a passive way. They're actively maintained. You can see that is because if your temperature starts falling for some reason, you start getting a cold, more blood cells will come in and try to warm you up. And if that starts failing, then you will go cold in the face and you go blue in the face. And then someone else will like shake Zug and be like, wait, are you okay? And there's like a whole conspiracy. And if we fail to help you, we'll call an ambulance. And now there's a whole hospital that's involved, just conspiring to keep your blood temperature to be normal. And so it's interesting, it's completely the reverse of physics. Or physics, where every law is just locally defined. Whereas here, it is actively maintained. Each law, the law that the temperature stays regulated at 98 degrees, is actually held up by a conspiracy of all of us. And so this sort of a thing requires a lot of context rather than content. And so the idea is that for stuff like this, which is basically everything in the real world that is not physics, you do need ways to collaborate, as Peter was also talking about earlier in his talk, you do need ways to collaborate and have insights continue to be co-creative even after you've done the shipping, which is what I was talking about earlier. Does that make sense, the production of insight, or did that not really help? There's some way in which, in the case of like, maybe a way to work this is in the second example, which is where we are at currently, is my claim. In the ebook, there's not a co-creation with the reader exactly. Why is that? Because the producer pre-packages the font list that you merely select from. So they're just bundling and selection. Here there's actually a little bit more co-creation in that there does not even exist a book before the reader comes into interaction with it. And so like Simona was saying, like there was never a comic book until someone suggested, I actually want to see this in comic book form. And that's when it gets co-created. And that becomes a bit more like decentralized production. And when we're talking about theories rather than just media, we're talking about decentralized production of insight. Again, watch the video to see how that will actually change a lot of things and how it'll help us sense make, especially highly adaptive things such as advanced AI, which could be potentially dangerous. We will need to keep our sense making at pace with the AIs that we will build.
You're not looking at when you put the decentralization of production of insight, you're not talking about an idea of different insights being able to come from different sources, but actually decentralizing the production of a single one through many sources to collaborate on the same.
It's actually hard to say because there's some way, if you notice, there's like a specialized formalism, as I say, which is actually a new kind of formalism. And so in some ways, you and the designer kind of come together to create the insight, just like you and your consumer came together to create the comic book. So actually there's a way in which there's not really like, there's a way in which we don't have good metaphors for what this is going to be, because we already imagine that if you want to ship something, of course you must make it modular first and finish doing what you're doing before you ship it. And that actually gets in order. I saw some more questions earlier. Yeah.
That totally makes sense. So this has changed my look on like why even the poor language models we have should be more like credibly neutral, without biases, personalized, universal, etc. What implications do you think that this framework brings to the question?
Yeah, so Aditya and I are actually working on not just this for theories, but also for interfaces generally. And there are, maybe I can pull it up, let me see. So you can also check out this post that I'll link later on. Here are 6 things that, can you read that? Oh wait, no, you didn't read. So the first thing, maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit. So the first thing that you can see is tailor-made media. So which means instead of writing post and then distributing, you create a post prompt that becomes the relevant thing. And a complaint that people have, well, if you watch an entirely different movie because you're like, oh, I want something funny and not grim, and change the actor for an actress, and also add a fun animal to it, then you're just watching completely different movies. However, people neglect, again, the kind of thing that Peter was talking about in his first challenge, which was that LLMs are actually pretty good at interoperation. And so a thing you can do is, we have the regular conversation about movies. I watch my movie, you watch your movie. But when I talk about the insight I've had about my movie, it translates the insight into the minor modifications that you made to your movie. So to the extent that there's some common essence, you can actually have interaction around it. The other thing is auto-differential privacy, which is also what I was bringing up in Peter's stuff, which is that a lot of this economy will be production of whatever you are creating. And so a thing that you want is an AI assistant that is able to replace whatever thing. Suppose I'm being recorded right now, and suppose it is the case that I don't want my face on there. What my assistant should automatically do is let whoever is holding this data, the controller, as Peter was saying, let them know that I don't like my face, which I don't have to tell them because my assistant knows this, having some context, and automatically generate a new face with new expressions for you. And it should be seamless, and that would actually, and the reason for differential privacy, I think for those of you who attended, I'm not going to talk about why differential privacy. I might actually stop here, but I'll just say that there's a lot more about attribution and storage in there that I'd be very, very excited to discuss if you do want to talk about the implications. There's lots of stuff written in lots of different ways that hopefully an AI will clean up and give to you.
Sorry, I have another question. Are you maybe just trying to describe the creation of intelligence itself in terms of human beings?
Creation of what, sorry?
Creation of human intelligence?
Human intelligence? You want to say more about that phrase?
Who was this person who said, if you wanted a milkshake, have to first create the universe?
Carl Sagan said if you want an apple pie, first you
Right,
must create the
apple
universe.
pie.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's pretty much the same thing. So human beings are like trying to just make sense of this universe which was first created. As you said, someone just shipped it instead of creating this whole product of meaning. And then intelligence emerged to make sense out of it.
Yeah, I'm still hoping for the rest of your question.
No, my question is, have you thought about this analogy, or are you trying to describe a similar thing?
I don't think I'm quite following. Does anybody who understands the question want to
I
paraphrase
mean,
it?
he's saying that intelligence at the end of the day is the ability to abstract the world. So you have a concrete apple pie, but then you create the idea of an apple pie, you abstract to what is an idea of a pie, what is the idea of food. You have like a chain of abstractions.
Is that close
Maybe
to what you're saying, Yash? Just slightly different there.
Yeah, maybe I need to think more. These are very loosely formed thoughts after listening to it.
I would have understood it as that this is a abstraction level of basic mechanics that are to be found in any kind of development level of human intelligence on all level. And it's probably also meant to be that, but it's like a map of the territory, and the map is always aimed at producing a relevant abstraction in the relevant points, and I think it's a good way to do that because it creates a framework that we now can refer to when we build AI, and it doesn't capture everything about human intelligence, like affective emotional intelligence or something like that is maybe not fully covered, but it doesn't need to be fully covered. But it refers to that what was, of course, to be taken out of our own self-analysis. But I agree that it was not a question in itself, but it was a statement.
So I think you were addressing something, which is that there's a way in which, I think like Bernd said, it is mirroring a lot of the ways we already do sense making. And there's a way in which we actually have lots of myths that dictate our activities. And one of the big myths is the myth of centralization. For example, the idea that you need a central bank in order to have currency is a thing that we had to break out of very slowly. And there's a similar idea of if we want everybody to talk to each other, maybe we need a universal language. No, in fact, we can have AI tools that translate each culture's language, and we can still talk to everybody. So you can't have this, as I said later on, harmony without homogenization. And so there is something to how our myths and our ideas and our image of man creates the gods that we create. And I want to stop doing that and actually examine what's going on such that we can stop reifying the poor things that we have, poor models that we have come up with of ourselves. And so the ability to look at our tools allows you to break free from the Stockholm syndrome of I do need to first figure out how to centralize it over here and finish and not let and control it completely, and then I can distribute it only once I have modularity, which again is a hallmark of science normally, which is it needs to be isolatable and repeatable, and all of that becomes less and less relevant when you're not working with physics-like things, but when you're working with more general things.
Can I add one more question?
Sure.
Or statement? Fitness question. I think that you precisely even point to what we should not repeat when human intelligence has formed, because our brain is a centralized force. We as agents are centralized black boxes, and we will never be able to not be it without the brain surgery cutting our brain halves in half or so. But that doesn't mean that we need to copy these centralized forces also to apply it to the technology that we build now.
So that's a great remark, because I would say that what we actually have is integrity. We are unlikely to make the mistakes that ChatGPT has, but we're not actually centralized. And this actually is a myth that you have, I'm a self, and somewhere in there I'm controlling things like the homunculus fallacy, as people might know. And I would claim that actually if you examine this deeper and deeper, which I think some conversations that I've had with Yash about where is this self coming from, are like the models you have of yourself of thinking you're located up here or something like that in a centralized way, not realizing that actually you and your brain is actually also billions of animals, little tiny animals that are neurons that are themselves operating in a very decentralized fashion. So before you stick on a centralization metaphor to yourself, if you examine that more deeply, you might be able to design better things if you want to do this biomimicry at
I
all.
mean, this is still a centralized brain because
We should talk about this. So
just because you have a user base with millions of people over one centralized information choke point doesn't make you a decentralized system, quite the opposite.
So I think there's a, well, I would love like a centralization versus decentralization. This is a conversation I'm having with several people already. And so if you want to have one of those, how much do we have decentralization? I claim that if you want to reject the myth of centralization, you do not want to polarize away and fight centralization. Instead, you want to notice that there has never actually ever been centralization anywhere at all. Even though in any given context, you can use it to figure out better solutions. Actually, there's nothing in the world that is actually really centralized. But this is a very, very weird claim, so I won't try to build it here. I will just raise my objection right now, and then we can continue this conversation.
Maybe there is no clean, no pure centralization. In a way, there is no pure decentralization even imaginable, because it would not be like decentralized single points, but just area.
Well, we can talk about this later on. I'm sure I'd love to have this conversation with you.
But the extrapolation of your idea seems to be possibly not, going towards a universe which is basically you're arguing that the universe is just not deterministic in some sense. So, intelligences can create their own laws as they want it to.
Well, it can be fundamentally deterministic, but at the level of abstraction that we're working with, it's hard to, for me, even though you might be completely determined by the laws of physics that underlie you, I don't relate with you as, oh, you're an algorithm and you do this. I just more sense into what you're saying and try to make sense of you in an ongoing fashion. And so it's more that biology does not seem to have had much luck with respect to the amenability to mathematics, whereas physics has had a lot of luck. And these sorts of complex systems, which are on the top left, for those of you who saw Kyle's talk, with the not just complicated systems, but complex adaptive systems, these formal models do not do as well as these post-formal models, which is what I'm trying to offer.
Yeah, if we can chat offline, I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Cool. I would love
I
that.
have another question. Will you be here to help us with the tech tree?
I actually already put my tech tree in the slides. I was the only one. I'm not sure why no one else put it. But anyway.
Touché.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.